welcome to today's Love Transformation class, ladies. And we've got a really amazing one for you today. I know that many of you have already noticed that perhaps there's a little bit of a pattern in terms of the results that you're getting or the kinds of people that you're attracting in your love life. But usually the thing that we need to change is often a bit of a blind spot for us. And I'm so excited to introduce our expert today, Veronica Grant, who's going to be sharing with us her unique formula for how we can identify these blind spots and really move through to success in our love life with ease. A beautiful structure, and I can't wait for you to share it. Welcome, Veronica.
Thanks so much for having me.
Isn't it interesting? I'm sure that a lot of women can relate to that feeling of, I'll be ready to date when. And for many of us, yes, it is like, I'll be ready to date when I just lose a few kilos, or when, you know, my business or my living situation is at a certain point. We have this, I'm ready to date when, and that when often never arrives, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about what's behind that.
I mean, first of all, we just live in a patriarchal world, right? Where like women are supposed to look a certain way, act a certain way, be a certain way. And it almost like, even though it's not like 100 or 200 years ago when our foremothers were around, there's still like this idea of like, we're supposed to be pleasing to men. And I'm speaking specifically to, you know, straight women here, or about straight women. And so there's this idea, whether or not we're consciously aware of it, that, oh, we're supposed to be pleasing to a man. And it comes like in just little comments where like, if you're walking down the street and a man just like yells out of his window, smile or something like that. And it's like, I don't have to smile for you, but it's those kind of little microaggressions that we experience in our day-to-day life that I think just has us thinking like, oh, well, like I have to be good enough in order to date. Otherwise, I'm not going to be lovable. And we are just like hounded that message over and over and over and over again. And again, sometimes it is more of the subtle messaging from like commercials or movies or TV shows. And sometimes it can be very explicit messaging that, depending on how you were raised by your parents, like, oh, be a nice little girl, like, you know, don't be too much, don't, you know, be too sensitive, or don't be too that, or don't be too this. And so then we learn to mold ourselves and kind of just smooth over the edges, you know, in ourselves and our personality and our quirks and all these things, even literally physically in our body, so that we can be quote unquote palatable.
There is this phenomena though, I've experienced myself, and I know that a lot of other women have, and that's when we're feeling really good in our body, we have this sense of confidence and we carry ourselves in a different way. And we can all think back to times in our life, if it's not now, when we did have perhaps a little bit more mojo or more confidence, and our ability to kind of be able to connect and perhaps attract men seems to be more effortless when we're carrying that energy around. So we kind of assume then, if I'm feeling frumpy, I'm feeling overweight, I'm just not going to be able to show up with that level of confidence.
Yeah, well, I think people will pick up on whatever energy you're putting out. So if you think that it's, for example, let's say you think it's a burden for someone to be with you because you might be in a larger body, then people are going to feel that, and they're going to feel that themselves. They're like, well, you know, she's a little big, but whatever, I'll deal with it, right? But if you don't feel like that for yourself, and you see your innate beauty and your innate worthiness, then people are going to feel that as well. And they're going to be excited to be with you because of that. And they're not going to give, you know, a rat's ass about the extra role, or it's not even extra role, the role that's there, you know, it just doesn't matter. And, you know, the one thing I always say to my clients is, look, you can, if you really want to, like, I can't stop you. If you want to lose a bunch of weight before you go date, you go do it and you go have fun. Just know that the kind of people that you might attract from that place, you might have more dates, you might have more sex, but more dates and more sex is just more dates and more sex. It has nothing to do with love in of itself. And do you really want to be with someone who only wants to be with you at a certain size? Because if we're really talking about a lifelong partner here, like, your body is going to change. One, as you age. Two, I mean, at least my body, my weight fluctuates with the seasons. It certainly fluctuated with the pandemic. And if you ever have children, or if you ever have an illness where your weight's going to fluctuate, like, it can't, your confidence and your worthiness cannot be tied to what you look like or the size of you, because you're setting yourself up, one, just for massive emotional swings, And then you're also, again, setting yourself up for this conditional acceptance from your partner. And that's just a very, very, honestly, at best, dysfunctional spot to be in with your relationship, and at worst, abusive.
We all know that we should have more self-love and we should have more body positivity and we should be able to love the body that we're in. I know there's a lot of women that really struggle with this, and I guess this forms part of the work that we actually do on our journey to manifesting a partner, right?
Yeah, and it was a big part of my journey. I struggled with my body image, and at the same time, I struggled in relationships for a long time. And I didn't put two and two together until, I was kind of unpacking things for myself. And for me personally, like, the women in my family were very, very body conscious, like, oh, you've gained weight, or even, oh, you've lost weight, which might feel like a compliment, but it still just like puts the focus on your body. And so you're constantly stressed about it. Right. And so I learned from a young age, like, oh, I can get positive, what's the word, like affirmations, positive praise when I'm, down 5 pounds or down however many pounds. And so I did that. And when you're little, it feels good getting praise, and you just kind of confuse it with love. Right. And so I was like, okay, well, if I look like this, then I can feel loved. And that makes me feel good enough, makes me feel worthy, all of the things. And because that's what I thought, that's what I learned, and how to feel loved, feel connected with someone, I took that outside of the family unit. And when I, deeply wanted a partner, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to get love if I look a certain way and they're able to, approve of me, so to speak. Now, during that time in my life, I wouldn't say I was consciously aware of what was going on, but looking back, it was very obvious what was going on. And this is part of my healing, is I had to unpack and connect a lot of these dots, which we'll talk about today. But ultimately, I had to heal. I know, like, we're talking a lot about like body image and stuff, and that's just, for me, that's really just my example of how my past and my childhood created the patterns that I found myself in my love life until I was able to unpack it and heal it. And for someone listening, you might be able to relate, oh yeah, like body image, that was a big thing for me growing up, or it might be something totally different, but the process doesn't really change. You have to, go back and do the spiritual work, do the emotional work, in order to shift these beliefs, shift the actions, because otherwise you're going to be stuck, like, trying to figure out, well, what should I text? Or does this sound stupid? Or maybe I just need to lose 10 more pounds, or whatever. And then once you're in that place, you're just, it's just not a fun place to be. First of all, it's just exhausting, but also doesn't really get you to where you want to go in your love life either.
We can all think of a beautiful woman that we know who just oozes in confidence, oozes in that beautiful feminine energy. She might not necessarily have a model type figure or the most slimmest physique, but she just really radiates something that really catches your eye and often catches the attention of men. In terms of the work that we talk about, right? Yeah. What's involved for just a regular girl like you and I who might have our own body issues? What is the work that we would need to do to get from where we are now in terms of not necessarily feeling that confident to becoming that woman?
Yeah, so this is getting into the frameworks. Okay, so I want everyone listening to imagine the Maslow hierarchy of needs. If you don't know what that is, Google it real quick. Doesn't matter what the little rungs are on that pyramid, but I just want you to get the vision of a pyramid with various rungs in your mind. I'll just go through the 4 steps and then we'll break it down a little bit more. So the bottom rung of the pyramid is spiritual work. The next rung of the pyramid is the emotional. The next rung is the mental, and the very top, so like the little, it's like the sugar and sweets, whatever, in the food guide pyramid, at least in the US, that's the physical. So that's like the things you do, the things you text, the things you say, all of the actual physical pieces that go into dating. And just to reiterate, I kind of alluded to this before, but a lot of times women will get stuck in the physical. I can't tell you how many DMs, emails, whatever I get around, like, gosh, around online dating, like online dating this, online dating that, texting this, texting that, pictures and profile and da, 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 da. And we just go like in a tailspin and we freak out and we think, okay, if I can just figure this out, then, you know, love life, great. And I'm just thinking, okay, Match.com, I believe, came around in 1995. Does that mean all of dating was magical and wonderful and great before 1995? Like whether or not you were dating before 1995 or whatever, like we can probably assume that no, dating probably was very similar to how it is now, just different tools. So instead of focusing and stressing out on all of that stuff that really just causes tons and tons of anxiety, we've got to start at the bottom of the pyramid, because otherwise, you know, if this visual doesn't work for you, think of it like as trying to fix something in your house when you have like a crappy foundation, when the foundation's cracking and falling into the earth. Like, why would you put that kind of time and money into something that it's literally just going to collapse on itself at some point in the future? It doesn't make sense. And the final thing I'll say about this is how you feel about yourself dictates your thoughts, right? So if you feel just kind of crappy, you're probably going to think, well, I'm not good enough for that kind of person, so I better settle for this kind of person. Okay. So what kind of actions is that going to create? That's going to create some actions on swiping right on certain people, swiping left on people that you don't think you're good enough for, or sending certain kind of messages, or not sending messages at all to people that you might be interested because, you know, you're not good enough. So how you feel really does have a direct impact on the actions that you take or don't take in dating. And so it's not so like, in my mind, woo woo to be like, how you feel dictates your life. Like, you know, I know that can be kind of like a manifesting law of attraction, woo woo type of concept, but like, I mean, it's a very direct logical link. So coming back to the pyramid, the bottom rung is spiritual. And I think that this is one of the most important pieces. I mean, obviously it's the bottom of the pyramid, but I think that there's a few things here that I think are helpful to keep in mind. The first thing that I think is really important when it comes to the spiritual work is that I really believe in order to do this deeper work, you have to believe and trust that you're exactly where you're meant to be. Because if you don't trust that, and you know, whether or not you believe in some sort of higher power, if you do, that's great. But if not, and you just believe in like the universe or humanity or whatever, that's fine. Like you don't have to have like this specific religious practice, but I do think there has to be some sort of trust that you are exactly where you need to be. And I also think what's really helpful is, you know, when you're doing this work, sometimes it's easy to look back at your past relationships and think, God, how was I so stupid? I did that, or I stayed in that relationship, or I ignored those red flags, or whatever it is. And that can be really, really hard on yourself. And again, that makes healing almost impossible. It's impossible to move up the rungs of the pyramid when you're talking to yourself like that. And so another thing that the spiritual piece really helps with is for you to believe that not only are you exactly where you're meant to be, but you've always been exactly where you have meant, where you're supposed to have been. And every relationship that you have, everything from a one night stand to a 30+ year marriage, that person has been a soulmate for you for that moment in time, meaning that your soul needed to learn some sort of lesson to grow to the next level or the next stage in your growth. And so when you can look at your life and your past relationships and everything like that from that perspective, and you really feel that and you can ground yourself in that, then you're in a really, really good spot to begin the healing. But I think that if this part is lacking, again, this is the foundation. If it's not there, then, you know, you can do all you want on the upper rungs, but eventually it's all going to cave in.
Right.
So that's the spiritual work.
When you talk about spiritual work, for those that maybe have a preconceived idea of what that is, or maybe no idea at all, can you give us some examples of what the spiritual work might involve?
Yeah. So this is going to just literally be, I think the best way to ground your spiritual work is to have some sort of practice that you do every day. So for example, you know, one thing that's talked a lot about on the internet, on Instagram, is like a morning meditation or some sort of morning routine. It doesn't have to be the morning. I do find there's something magical about the morning hours. However, I have a baby. My morning routine is out the window. So I get that maybe it's, you know, not going to be possible to do in the morning for everyone, or I don't know, maybe not a morning person. But having some sort of practice every single day that allows you the space whether you like to journal around it or just feel into it in your meditation practice, that allows you to just feel like I'm exactly where I need to be. I'm exactly where I need to be. And, you just connect with your breath. You can feel your body being supported by the ground or whatever's supporting you underneath you. And it can really just be as simple as that. It's not like this whole, like, have to go on some sort of pilgrimage to like some far off place. I mean, you can do that if that really helps you to connect spiritually and connect to yourself and the larger things around you. But it can just really be as simple as just checking in every day, even if it's just for a couple of minutes, 5 minutes, and just breathing, feeling yourself on the earth, checking in, and just coming back to that trust that, yeah, I'm exactly where I need to be. I'm supposed to be here right now.
I know that can be really useful, but also really challenging, especially if we've met someone and we have that potential to sort of race ahead too fast, too soon with where things are going, and really being able to sit in that place of trust, right? What is meant for me won't pass me by. And if things are going to work out, I just need to show up with my best self. And if it's meant to be, it'll be, right? And so you really feel like that spiritual practice and getting that, starting off with that, helps set you up for all of the next stages.
Yeah, because now you're getting to another concept that I haven't talked about, but I definitely think it's part of the spiritual work, which is non-attachment. Again, really, really hard to date when you're very attached to a specific outcome happening. But if you can, again, use this time to just separate yourself from whatever is going on outside of you, and just really feel that no matter what happens, with this person that you're dating or messaging with or whatever happens, like, you're meant to have experienced that. There's some lesson, there's some sort of healing in there for you. Whether or not this person becomes your forever person, you ultimately don't have, at least not 100% control over that. And so practicing letting that go and just being able to witness it and separate your being, yourself, from this thing outside of you. I think the spiritual practice is really about cutting cords, cutting ties from all these things. We have all these attachments, right? And it's like, we're human, so we're going to have attachments to earthly things, right? Like, that's just normal. But I think the practice or the work is the more we can just cut off all these ties from like needing all of these things to make ourselves feel happy or feel worthy or feel good enough or whatever, being able to separate ourselves from the things that we have or don't have in our life, and still being able to feel like our divinity and our worthiness and all of those things.
The idea of being in control as well, because, a lot of the reason why we don't end up with the kind of success in our romantic life and our relationships that we would like is because often we're applying the same principles that we use to get success in perhaps our professional life or other areas of our life, which mean we do have the ability to be able to really control the kind of outcomes and results and achievements that we get in those other areas. When it comes to relationships and it involves other people, it's a whole different dynamic, isn't it? Are there any particular practices, non-attachment practices, that work particularly well for your clients?
Yeah. So with non-attachment, I think the best thing to do is to first understand that it's not a thing you do or a thing you accomplish. So it's not like an event. It's really just a way of moving through the world. Where my clients actually struggle the most with non-attachment is having this story of, I have to be not attached. I have to be not attached. And it's just like they're waiting for it to like turn on and just happen. Non-attachment is like it's just like a devotional practice, because it's always, like I said earlier, like we're humans, we have earthly attachments, and so the desire to have love or money or be in a smaller body or bigger house or whatever, like those things probably aren't ever going to go completely away. And so when you do feel like, gosh, if I just lost 5 more pounds, or gosh, if I just made more money, then blah, blah, blah. And when you catch yourself, in those places or in those thought patterns, I mean, the most important thing by far is just be really kind to yourself. attachment is a process. It's a learning thing. You're going to be working on this the rest of your life. It's not something like, oh, well, I used to be attached to everything and now I'm not attached. That no one says that. It's just not a thing. And so I think one of the, the easiest things to do is when you're feeling that attachment, like, gosh, I really want this relationship to work out. I really want this new job or this client or whatever. Well, what is it that you believe that this thing will give you? What do you think it'll make you feel? What do you think it'll do for you? And then how can you find a way to do that for yourself or make yourself feel that way with or without this outside thing? So if you believe that having this person want to continue dating you will make you feel like chosen and good enough, well, how can you make yourself feel chosen and good enough? And that can be anything. That can just be going to the grocery store and buying yourself flowers. That can be taking care of yourself. And I had someone, as we're recording this, I'm running my annual Date Yourself Challenge, and someone like booked all of her medical appointments for the year. Like, how often do we put off, like our annual and our dentist appointments and all of those things? I'm like, wow, like that's such a good idea. So how can you make yourself feel however you want to feel? And so you can feel that way regardless of whether or not this outside thing comes into fruition. But a lot of women in my audience were like, I'm really independent, like super independent, like almost like to a point of like hyper independence. And I think what that does is it cuts us off from the ability to just really feel. And so I think when we kind of play into this whole like patriarchal, masculine, like dating kind of game, so to speak, I don't think it's a game, but that's just kind of like, I think the mindset that a lot of us operate in, then we unconsciously think that we do need to have these things to feel certain ways. And for women who really pride themselves on their independence, that can be kind of a hard pill to swallow. And maybe there's not even a conscious awareness that that's what's going on. But I do find that to be the case most of the time. And the independence is almost like the protective armor that we put around ourselves because, we haven't gotten quote unquote chosen by someone to make ourselves feel good enough. So it's like, screw that. I'm really independent. I don't need anybody. And so it's just like this dynamic, or these two like sides of a pendulum that I find a lot of women oscillate between, like really, really wanting something and then like getting fed up or jaded or hurt or whatever, and then going back into like the really hyper independent spot and then being like, okay, well, I really do want somebody, and then kind of loosening things up, but then like outsourcing, the worthiness and all the ways that they want to feel.
There is a fine line as well of going from this feeling, right, of like, I'll be 10 out of 10 happy once I have the happy family and the happy ever after picture. And while I'm trudging along as a single, I'm not, I'm only at 7 out of 10 happy. Then going to the other side where you create a life that you really love. How do we know that we're not taking that? Like, where do you see is that happy medium between being really independent and loving your own life, as opposed to not feeling satisfied and happy because you're not in a partnership?
Yeah, well, I think that's just kind of part of the dance, right? Like, you're never going to be perfect. There's going to be some days where things feel like you're just really in your groove. And then some days you're just going to be in this space of longing and, desiring a partnership. And it might feel painful, might be hard. The visual that I like to use is, when it comes to wanting a partnership, does the energy of it feel like you're gripping really tight and like, ugh, or does it feel like you're holding it in the palm of your hands? Because I really work with non-attachment with my clients, but I never want them to think, or anyone in my audience to think, that I just want them to give up on wanting a relationship, because I don't want that for anyone. Like, I want everyone to have a relationship that wants a relationship. And I do think that's possible, and everyone is worthy of the relationship and the love that they desire. But I want you to be able to just hold it in the palm of your hands, like you're trying to hold like water, not like the water, drip through. Like, how can you just see that it's there, see that desire that it's there, but then separate yourself, your worthiness, your being from this thing that you're wanting. And I think, you know, how to know whether or not you're in the right lane, so to speak. This kind of, it reminds me of the answer I give to women who are like, well, should I be dating right now or not? Should I take a dating break and work on some of this stuff first? And I think my answer will be the same. So my answer is, when, like, does everything feel triggered? And feeling triggered is different than being disappointed or hurt, right? So if you are on the apps, let's say, and you're messaging with a couple people and I don't know, none of it transpires, like they just ghost or just endless texting, you're like, screw this, not into that, want to meet up, you know, sooner than later, and it's not happening. You're allowed to feel disappointed or rejected or just frustrated. Like those would be normal human reactions from having that experience, right? But let's say you have that same experience where people just kind of weren't texting back or nothing was really moving forward, and it just sent you into a tailspin. And it was like, oh, why me? Everything's so awful. Da, 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 da. That's a triggered response. So when your response is greater than what the actual occurrence was, to me, that's like, hey, this is bumping up against something, and it's not really about what's going on in front of you. And so I think in terms of like the loving your life and all that kind of stuff, and then like kind of oscillating into like the more, you know, woe is me kind of thing, you can be really independent or interdependent and just like really living your life and everything, and it can feel really great. And there can be that longing, almost sadness that you don't have the partnership. Like again, if you want something, you don't have it, it's normal to feel a little bummed out about it. That would be normal. But if it's like sending you into like this tailspin of like, woe is me, why me, God hates me, the universe hates me, like no one ever loves me, it's like me, or like victim me or whatever, then again, that's a triggered response. And to me, that tells me that you're bumping up against something else. And while there might be disappointment, not might be, but I'm sure there's disappointment around your relationship status, that also tells me that there's something else going on. And I want to work on that something else before we even think about dating, because you're more than likely going to just have more and more triggered responses when you date.
So how do we go about that? We're dating, it's really triggering this, I'm not good enough, or all men are this, or all this sort of like big picture thinking.
That basically makes up the emotional work. So the spiritual is the very bottom foundation. The next piece is the emotional. So I think what we have to first understand is that I don't care how old you are, if you're 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, I don't care. We're all playing out unresolved childhood, I'll just say things. Sometimes it might feel a little bit more obvious, especially if you've experienced like capital T trauma. So any kind of death, divorce, maybe you were like really wealthy and then your parents lost everything and you're in poverty, like whatever. Like that, sometimes when people have experienced those kind of things, it can feel more obvious. I obviously put violence and abuse into those categories as well. But for people who had quote unquote idyllic childhoods, it can feel like, oh, that doesn't apply to me. I would put myself in that category. You know, on the outside, everything was hunky-dory, looked great. There was a lot of pressure around feeling looking a certain way, which dictated the way I felt and how I received love. So my point is that everyone has inner child work. Everyone has childhood issues that they're playing out in relationships. And so in order to heal that, we have to go back and connect with the inner child. Now, it's not therapy. You don't have to rehash everything, but you do need to be able to connect some dots, and just some really great questions to ask yourself, especially when you're feeling triggered, you know, in the relationship that you're in or while you're dating. Ask yourself, when have I felt like this before? Or what does this remind me of? Or who does this person remind me of? Any of those kinds of questions are more likely than not going to remind you of like, oh, well, it kind of reminds me of how my mom and dad were with each other. Or it kind of reminds me of how I had to walk on eggshells so that my mom's temper wouldn't explode. Or it kind of reminds me how I had to take care of my parents and I feel like I'm having to like take care of this person or whatever. Once you can begin to connect dots, then you have to be able to connect with and then ultimately reparent your inner child. Because what happened, the way I like to look at it is, like, imagine the way you were raised. You were raised to put on a pair of glasses, and those glasses was how you saw the world. And it had a certain prescription, a certain kind of lens, and that's like, oh yeah, this is what the world looks like, right? And until you change the pair of glasses, the glasses that you're looking through, you don't know anything different, and it just feels like this is true. This is absolute reality. But inner child work, what it does is that by connecting with inner child and reparenting her and helping her heal and feel some of these things that she didn't get to heal and feel when she was younger, allows her to put on a different pair of glasses and see herself, men, women, love, relationships, the world, all of those things from a completely new lens. And that's really what inner child work is. Well, that's the goal of it. And so it's all about just allowing your inner child the space to feel and heal, because she probably wasn't allowed that when she was younger, and then reparenting her so that she can begin to, again, put on that new pair of glasses.
I love that you make it sound really quite simple. And I know we've both probably experienced situations where just unlocking one thing with a client has such a beautiful ripple effect and positive impact on just themselves in general and in their relationships. Yeah. But I really want to bring up a point here about getting help.
Yes.
Because we are making it sound simple. And it is such an important step. I think people think of getting a coach, they think of the strategy and, you know, mentoring me through the dating phases and giving my profile an overhaul. But this is really the important part as far as getting help, I believe. Do you agree?
Yeah. Oh, I completely agree. You only know what you know, right? Like when I was going through a couple of very, very difficult relationships that were, you know, ending, that was the first time I ever, you know, worked with anybody. And like, I only knew the experience that I had with my family growing up. And so when I told her about my upbringing and my family and my relationship to them, she was like, oh, so it sounds like you didn't really have an emotionally available family. And I remember sitting there thinking like, oh yeah, I guess you're right. Then I was able to begin a lot of the unlearning and then relearning process. But like, I would have never been able to figure that out on my own. You know, I always tell people like, this stuff isn't rocket science. Like it is quite simple, but like it is hard, if not impossible, to A, see your blind spots, and then B, you only know what you know. Like, or you don't know what you don't know, right? Like, how would you know that something isn't how things have to be if it's all you've ever seen or experienced?
I think we often try and look to our friends to help us with this kind of thing, but they're not necessarily aware also too of how to uncover those blind spots, or I call them like love blocks, the things that we can't see ourselves, otherwise we would have changed them. Often our friends have got the same ones. Interestingly, that's why we tend to attract the same types of friends and validate each other's experiences. And I love that you have this framework for us to understand about that emotional work and inner child work and whatever modality to help to shift some of those blind spots. Is there anything else you'd like to add about the emotional work?
It just takes time. But also at the same time, it doesn't have to take years and years and years. I think when I start talking about this stuff, I think sometimes people's eyes begin to glaze over and they're like, oh my God, I've got years of therapy or dealing with this stuff. And I can't speak for like how other people do it or their process or whatever. But I just find that therapy is, and I'm not bashing therapy, therapy is important and vital depending on situation. But for some people, I think they go to therapy wanting something like coaching, but then it's therapy. And so they're not getting something like coaching. And so there's that disconnect there. You know, what I would say is that it doesn't take as long as you might think. And also it's not as, let's just put it this way, like trying to ignore the stuff or think, well, okay, Veronica, like I hear what you're saying, but I don't have to deal with this. I can, you know, kind of just shove it down and just get around it. And, you know, it's like trying to like push a beach ball under the water. you might do it for like a second or even like a whole freaking minute, but at some point that beach ball is going to come shooting out of the water and it's going to hit you in the face or something, right? And so it's much harder to actually just suppress and ignore and keep pushing this stuff down and away than it is just to be like, all right, let's go there, because you're the one controlling it, right? At some point that beach ball is going to fly up and hit you in the face, right? So coming back to your life, would you rather just be able to suppress it until one day you cannot ignore it anymore because you go through a devastating breakup or just something else, like huge changes in your life and everything just comes up at once? That's way more difficult than it is to be like, all right, I'm just going to bring it up. I'm going to be the one in control of this. Yeah, there's going to be some emotions that come up. I'm going to feel probably sad. I'm probably going to feel angry. I'm going to feel grief. But like when you're the one dictating it, it's so much less scary. So I recommend, like, I don't want to say control, because I know that can be like a triggering word because everyone wants to be in control. But like when you are able to have the upper hand, you know, in dealing with some of your old stuff, that's just going to make a world of difference than when like you are forced to deal with it.
I know that a lot of the beautiful women in our community are quite self-aware, and we talked about connecting the dots and then having a process to be able to shift or transform those things. Not everyone, or even if we can connect the dots, not everyone is really that sure about like how do I now actually go about changing. I mean, we obviously have access to loads of resources online and books and podcasts and all sorts of things, but I think, and I'm going to give this another spruik as well, I do definitely think this is where having the support of a coach to help you actually work through it, so you're not stuck in that phase of like connecting the dots and knowing I need to work on like a daddy issue or a this or a that, but not really knowing like how to change it.
Yeah. So I will say that sometimes that can be the most frustrating part, or stage, I should say, because, you know, you don't know what you don't know, but then you get to a spot where you know what you don't know. So you're like, okay, now I know that I have daddy or mommy or whatever issues. Crap, now what do I do? And so sometimes being in that place can be more frustrating because it's like, now you don't know what to do. But that's a really great place to work with a coach who is, you know, versed in inner child stuff, because it does take some work to be able to shift then the thought patterns and the actions, right? I do think it's much easier once you're able to begin the healing process, because like we said earlier, that shifts your thoughts, which shifts your actions. But sometimes it's a matter of like, okay, I'm feeling triggered right now. My inner child 6-year-old response would be da 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 da. What is my present day, not like healed self, but like my present self-aware, like what are her actions going to be? And then gradually taking the actions from the inner child calling the shots to your present adult day self calling the shots. And that's where a coach is really helpful, because coaching is about taking action. It is about setting a goal and then moving towards the goal. And, you know, sometimes therapy does or doesn't do that, just depending on the therapist. Therapists can help you often connect the dots, because you rehash a lot of stuff, but then you've got to move into the action space, right? Like just having awareness is not enough. And sometimes just being stuck in the awareness phase can actually feel quite frustrating.
So after we have worked through, uncovered some of our blind spots or our blocks, worked through, healed some of those sensitivities or wounds that the inner child has, what's the next stage after that?
Yeah, so then it's just to look at the beliefs and the things that you tell yourself and the stories that you tell yourself. This might look like mantras, affirmations. I like to have my clients write out new stories. It can look like EFT. It can look like just writing down all of your fear-based or limited-based thinking, and then shifting the thoughts around to something not like the opposite, but like something that feels more, you know, for example, like if a belief is like, I'm not good enough, that's very simplistic, but let's just say that's the belief. Like you wouldn't necessarily replace that with I am good enough, because you just may not be there, right? But you might begin to say something like, I am entertaining the idea that I believe I'm good enough, or I give myself permission to believe that I'm good enough. And so you can begin to build that bridge between where your thinking is now, your thought patterns are now, to where you want to go. Now, people are probably somewhat familiar with this kind of work, the beliefs, the affirmations, mantras, because this is where a lot of personal growth, including the dating advice kind of stuff, starts. And I really think that when you start here, I mean, you're just leaving out all this other stuff that we've been talking about this whole time. And that makes it much, much harder. But then you're also relying on willpower to change your thoughts and or your actions. You know, for anyone who's been on a diet before, you know, willpower works for a week, maybe a month if you're lucky, maybe a couple months if you're really lucky. But at some point, like you're going to hit a breaking point and you're going to get triggered, or you're going to be tired, or you're going to just whatever. And all that willpower is going to go out the window, and you're just going to be right back to where you started. And every time you do that cycle, you're going to feel more and more defeated. And so with my clients, like I don't even worry about what their thoughts and beliefs are. I don't care. And a lot of that, like I said, a lot of that stuff gets worked out on its own when we do some of the underlying work. But once we have done some of the foundation on the healing work, then we'll say, okay, so what are the limiting beliefs and stories that you're still operating by? Okay, now let's look at them. But that can be like 2 months in, 3 months in to when I'm working with a client. I mean, just, yeah, it depends on the pace of the client, like where they are in their own journey. I think when you start there, you're really setting yourself up for failure.
I can hear the thoughts of many of the women watching thinking, oh my God, this kind of feels really hard. And I know that sometimes when we start down this journey of sort of self-growth and self-development, we actually start to unpack and uncover even more things that we feel are wrong about ourselves. We feel a little bit even more broken once we know these things. For anyone that's sort of at this place where it's like, oh God, all this, do I have to do all this, and then sometimes I hear women say, and I don't see guys working on themselves, and why is it?
So here's what I would say. Imagine, someone listening, imagine you and I were coaching together and you were telling me all your stuff. And I was like, dang, that sounds really messed up. I'm glad I'm not you. Wow. And there was just like a lot of judgment, right? You would be like, wow, what a B word. If we were working together, you would probably want your money back. You wouldn't feel safe. You wouldn't want to open up. You would just completely shut down, and for good reason, right? Like I'm not creating a safe environment, for you to emotionally heal and grow, right? But the thing is that we do that to ourselves all the time. Like, gosh, I have to do this, or I have to do that, or like I experienced this, or I was dumb and did that, or blah, blah. We just pass all that judgment on ourselves. And look, you can do every single thing that I talked about in this call, and every single thing that I teach on my podcast or my programs or whatever. You can do every single thing. However, if you still are mean to yourself and shit talk yourself like that, then your growth and your healing's only going to be able to take you so far. I would rather you use none of the tools that I have just taught you and talked about, and you just be nice to yourself. Like, I would rather you do that than do everything, but then still be mean to yourself. And the thing is that like a little bit goes a long way. Like, I know we covered a lot of ground here. You don't have to do everything. You don't have to, I think it's, I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but I do think that a lot of people who are especially listening to this kind of summit, like, do enjoy working on themselves and do enjoy connecting us. I know it can be overwhelming for some people, but I think there usually is this element of like, oh, wow, like I understand why I do that, because it's liberating, because it doesn't mean that you're messed up. It just means like, oh yeah, I do this because of X, Y, Z. So it can feel very liberating. So I would hold on to that if you already feel that in doing this work. And if not, then I would, and if that's not you, then I would see what kind of lightness or liberation you can feel from understanding that, oh yeah, like I don't do this because there's something wrong with me. I do this because I had to walk on eggshells in my house growing up, or whatever, the situation might be. But then more than anything, you just got to be nice to yourself. Don't do any of this. I don't care. That's fine. Just be nice to yourself. And that alone will probably take you further than continuing to crap talk yourself.
And as we approach the highest pieces of the pyramid.
Yeah. So then that just gets into the physical, the ins and outs of sending texts and sending messages. And like, to be totally honest, I don't coach a lot around that with my clients because they don't need it. They just don't, because they're able to trust themselves. They're able to feel into like, oh, I think I want to say this, or, oh, I think I need to draw this boundary, or, oh, this person's not making me feel good, so I'm going to just end it with them. I mean, look, there is definitely some conversation around it in my calls, but more often than not, if they show me like a texting, chain, or bring a situation that they just encountered either in their partnership or in someone that they've been talking to on the apps or whatever, I'm always going to be like, okay, so what are the beliefs, or what is the fear? What is this thing bumping up against, or whatever? And then let's look into that. And then like, they're going to know what to do. I can't tell my clients what boundaries they need to set or what a red flag is or whatever, because it's going to be different for everyone. My red flag might not be your red flag, and your red flag might not be my red flag, or same with boundaries or needs or wants in a relationship. And so it doesn't do my clients any like of good to be like, oh, well, we should do da 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 da. But if they are getting tripped up with like what to say, what to text, who to swipe on, all that kind of stuff, we'll look at that and they'll have an action to do based on that at the end of our conversation. But it's always going to be tied back to like, well, what's the thing that's causing this stress or causing this frustration or causing this situation? Let's look into that. And then more often than not, they'll be like, oh yeah, okay, I need to do this. I'm like, sounds good. And then that's what they do.
And I know that you have a lot more wisdom and tools to share with our audience through your free masterclass. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so my masterclass is called 5 Steps to Ending Overwhelm and Anxiety in Your Love Life. And I talk a lot more about this pyramid of transformation. I also talk about, give a little bit more of an, I don't know, I guess you could say the science behind inner child work. So if you're like, all right, this sounds kind of interesting, let me see how this works. Then you'll really love that workshop. I dive a lot more into kind of the things that we've been talking about, so that you can begin to shift your patterns to something you would, like to be living, and most importantly, to shift your patterns from the inside out so that they're more sustainable, over the long run.
Beautiful. And drum roll, today's meditation is a really beautiful one. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're intrigued by connecting with your inner child and you're like, I wonder what that looks like, you're in luck. So I've included a meditation to help you connect with the inner child so you can begin healing, the experience that she had, so that you can begin the process of reparenting and then shifting the emotions, beliefs, all that kind of stuff. So I hope you really enjoy that one.
Amazing. Can't wait to dive into that. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time, sharing all of your tools, tips, advice, and wisdom with our audience. Thank you for being here, Veronica.
My pleasure. It was fun.
Is there any final thing you'd like to share with our audience before we finish up?
I think this kind of goes without saying, but I just always like to remind women that, you're not broken. You don't have to fix yourself, because you're not broken. There's just a different pair of glasses that you were raised to put on, and now it's just about putting on a different pair of glasses so you can see things in a way that's more helpful and more aligned for you and the life that you want. But I don't want you to pick up the messaging that you're broken, because you're not. No one's broken.
Beautiful. Thank you for those thoughts. We are all deserving of love, and it's our time now, right? Thanks for joining us today, everyone. We'll see you all again tomorrow on the Love Breakthrough Virtual Retreat. Bye for now.